Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Morundi, and on behalf of the Christian Science House, Chapel, and Study Room, I'd like to welcome you all today and thank you all for coming. Today's talk is the second in a series of events that we're sponsoring this summer at the Chautauqua community. Our third and final event will be held next Thursday at 3 p.m. at Hurlbut Church. Bible scholar Madeline Maupin will present a talk entitled Out from the Shadows, Women of the Bible, and we certainly hope that you'll attend if you can. Today's speaker probably needs little introduction to many of you. Marshall Ingwerson has a long, diverse, and distinguished career as a journalist for the Christian Science Monitor, a highly respected and internationally renowned newspaper. Eventually, Marshall's success as a journalist, along with his insightfulness and leadership strengths, resulted in his ascendancy to the role of editor during a time of great change for both the Monitor, journalism, and news media generally. After his turn as editor came to an end, he accepted the role of Chief Executive Officer for the Principia, a 127-year-old educational institution, multi-campus, serving students from pre-kindergarten through college. Now, it just so happens that at the same time Marshall was serving as chief executive, I was a member of the board of trustees at Principia. And the only reason I mention this is because I had a front row seat to observe how Marshall works. What I saw was a man who honors history, tradition, and values, but someone who's also looking ahead for positive, meaningful change. A modest man. And maybe most importantly, a seeker of truth. Someone with intellectual curiosity who's comfortable processing complex information and working his way through vexing situations and predicaments. Maybe most importantly, though, I know that Marshall is a man who truly strives to embody the motto of his beloved Christian Science Monitor, which is to injure no man, but to bless all mankind. Now, I have no idea whether or not his talk today is going to further cement my personal sense of the world today, or if it'll reveal a need for me to shift my paradigms dramatically, but I'm ready to find out, and I'm sure you are too. So without any further delay, please welcome Marshall Ingwerson.
Okay, first of all, is my sound on? No. Okay, how about now? All right, great. Thank you, Dennis. That was great. I'd like to have a copy of that. This is my first time to Chautauqua, and it's what fun. I mean, I love being here, and I'm so glad to be speaking to you all today. Boy, now the sound is got even bigger, right? Okay. So the title of this talk, Now is the Best of Times, probably sounds ridiculous to some of you, and to others it might even make you angry. Thanks for coming anyway. It is hopelessly out of tune with the current vibe. A safer and more familiar message today would be to promise to chart all the ways that we're speeding helplessly towards civilizational collapse. As a theme, you can't go wrong with that. The decline of democracy, climate disaster, a brave new world owned by robber baron tech bros and Chinese Beijing bureaucrats, children sitting in class glassy-eyed between pings on their phone while AI does their homework on its way to taking over the world. These are the grim prognoses that we're so, comfortable with. And for at least one good reason. It makes us feel like the right alarms have been sounded. Wake up world, there's something happening here. And this does seem to be an age, a historical moment of anxiety. Uncertainty over just about everything is off the charts. Social trust in institutions and in each other, in this country especially, has been dropping since the 60s, and it just keeps ebbing lower, whether Democrats or Republicans are running the country. It's not about Trump. It's not about biting. It has much deeper roots than that. The young especially report high levels of stress and low levels of optimism. You probably knew all that. So let's start this journey at another anxious time, a half century ago in the 1970s. This was the era in which I came of age, and perhaps many of you did also. It was a time of deep cultural and political divides. Remember that? Young people were questioning the legitimacy of everything. And one of the most sweeping worries at the time was the environment. We had a mushrooming awareness of how modern life was stressing the planet. Everything was getting dirtier. I got my first real job at the Christian Science Monitor in Boston in 1979. And when I joined the community boating club there, I was warned that the Charles River was so dirty that if you fell in, you should immediately get a tetanus shot.
Oh, shoot.
And they weren't kidding. In fact, the joke was that if you fell in the Charles, you could get pregnant, whether you were male or female. That's how dirty it was. The Charles was not an outlier. It was not alone. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio occasionally caught on fire. Acid rain was falling across the Northeast, and it was poisoning forests, killing trees, peeling paint, and corroding statues. I was a student at the University of California in Irvine when two chemistry professors there figured out that the aerosols used in spray cans were deteriorating the ozone layer of the atmosphere, it blocks most of the sun's harmful UV rays and basically keeps the Earth habitable. And sure enough, within a few years, a very worrying hole in the ozone appeared over Antarctica and was growing rapidly year by year. In the early mid-70s, I was a high school distance runner in Orange County, California, that Orange County, just south of Los Angeles. And in those days, the orangey-brown smog was sometimes so bad you could taste it. In the fall, we would periodically have practice canceled for smog emergencies, where everyone was advised to stay indoors and avoid physical activity, not just athletes, everybody. In other words, breathe only if absolutely necessary. In those days, the LA Basin had more than 100 stage 1 or higher smog alerts a year in, year out, ever since the system was established in 1955 and then for decades after that. It was a very daunting problem. People on one side of it said reducing smog would demand redesigning Southern California away from car culture. That's going to happen soon. On the other side, people said that the kinds of restrictions or regulation you would need to clean the air would just suffocate the regional economy. I think many thought that the grimy air in LA was just a permanent condition. And yet, let's fast forward to today. As it happens, I moved back to Orange County a few years ago, and I still go out for a run several times a week, on good weeks. And it took me a while to notice, but something is missing. The air doesn't burn the back of your throat or sting your eyes anymore. In fact, the number of stage 1 smog alerts in LA has gone from well over 100 a year, from the 50s through the 70s to 0. Not a single one since June 20th, 1999.
Wow.
And since then, the number of unhealthy ozone days has dropped a further 40%. Small particle smog, another measure, has also been dramatically reduced, even though it spikes for a few days when there's a wildfire upwind. But this is a massive transformative change. And it neither demanded changing the Southern California car economy, the whole car culture, nor shifting the economy into reverse. In fact, since the 1970s, the population of Metro Los Angeles has grown by more than a third. More freeways have been built, and there are more cars per person. So more people in more cars are driving more miles on more roads. and yet the air is dramatically cleaner and healthier. The atmosphere, quite literally, has fundamentally changed. And it's not just LA, by the way. It still usually ranks as the smoggiest city in the country. But that just means that everywhere else has become significantly cleaner too. Rivers are cleaner. The Cuyahoga River, you'll be glad to hear, hasn't caught fire since 1969. The Charles in Boston has been officially declared swimmable. I have swum in it, though not on purpose. It was a kayaking incident. Paris's Seine River, you may remember, was the scene of several swimming events in the last Summer Olympics. And just recently, I think just a couple weeks ago, it was open to public swimming. And the Seine was not only toxically unswimmable in the 20th century, but was ecologically dead in many sections. No more. Urban rivers in downtown Berlin, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and Oslo are all now becoming public swimming zones. You don't hear about acid rain anymore because over the past quarter century, the acids in rain have been reduced by 30 to 50%, depending on which acid you're measuring. And several years ago, the scientists even observed that the gaping hole in the ozone has begun to heal over. It's been shrinking, and it's scheduled or estimated to heal over completely in the next couple decades. So, what has happened here? These problems were very difficult, either technically or politically or both, but something has really worked, and on a big scale. Or more accurately, a whole lot of different steps taken by a whole lot of different people. Local governments, federal legislators, aka Congress, diplomats, corporations, technology entrepreneurs have really, really worked. We figured out how to reverse direction on these really large global problems, and we did it. To me, the most striking thing about all of this is that virtually no one has noticed. We tend to simply move on mentally to the next scary thing. So let's look at an even bigger picture. Many here may remember a best-selling book that came out in 1968, written by a well-regarded Stanford professor, Paul Ehrlich. It was called The Population Bomb. Dr. Ehrlich took a very big picture, global look at how fast the world population was growing, which was exponentially at the time, and he did the math. What he found was that humanity was very rapidly outgrowing the capacity of the Earth's total agricultural sector to produce enough food. We were soon, very soon, going to have more people than we could feed, even theoretically. This is how the book began. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. Now, not only was the book a bestseller, and I remember seeing it around and talked about it even though I was just a basketball-crazed kid, but Ehrlich was interviewed on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show more than 20 times over that year or so. He was very influential, and he has remained influential for decades. He's still a respected scholar, still at Stanford, well into his 90s, and his ideas remain fundamentally baked in to the way many people look at the world. Now, this is the point at which I make the embarrassing observation that hundreds of millions of people did not, as it turned out, die of starvation in the 1970s, or the 1980s, or the 1990s, or any time in the 50-plus years since Professor Ehrlich made his prediction. And that is not because the population stopped exploding. We now have well over twice the number of people lighting the planet as we did when he wrote the book. It's not even that we added massive acreage and put it under the plow. The world is tilling a little more land than in 1968, but not a lot. And yet, here's what has happened. Famines have decreased, not increased, with population growth. Go figure. And they have decreased pretty dramatically. All the famine deaths in all the 5 decades since Ehrlich wrote his book total significantly less than in the single decade in which he wrote it, or in most decades before that. Calories per person actually increased on every continent. So it's not just that rich people are able to waste still more food, and while the poor continue to starve. More people are getting access to that food as global poverty shrinks. There are still famines and food crises in the world, but they're generally because of war. Think of Gaza today, or Yemen, which is not only at war, but normally gets most of its grain from Ukraine, also at war. But none of these situations has anything to do with the ability to produce enough food. So how did this happen? While the global population doubled, the output per acre of staples such as corn, wheat, and rice tripled. We went through what is called the Green Revolution, which was basically one new idea after another, building on each other to leverage more food out of every acre. New ideas in irrigation methods, crop rotation, seed development, fertilizers, tillage practices, on and on. But the key word in that sentence is ideas. We keep figuring stuff out. It turns out, as Harvard professor Steven Pinker has noted, people don't depend on stuff. They depend on ideas. Within the span of a few decades, we are now able to feed the world to a degree we couldn't, even when the population was a tiny fraction of what it is now. This is a version for our own times, if you think about it, of the loaves and the fishes. Now, some of you can point to a gazillion problems with modern agriculture, and I'm not going to dispute you. I'm going to say, yeah, we've got to figure that stuff out. And if history is any guide whatsoever, we will. We absolutely will. And here's what I think is the most underappreciated story in modern times. From the dawn of time, the overwhelming majority of humanity has lived at the subsistence level, always one bad winter or broken foot away from starvation. For most of history, only small elites have ever escaped poverty. Even 200 years ago, 6 out of 7 people globally were destitute, still living in extreme or so-called absolute poverty. 6 out of 7 people. Life expectancy globally was about 30 years. And that does not mean, by the way, that at the age of 30 you were old in those days. It means that huge numbers of people never even grew old. In Thomas Hobbes's famous words, the natural life of man was nasty, brutish, and short, and lived in constant fear of violence. Since then, not only does that share of people in poverty keep falling, it keeps falling faster, decade by decade. In my own lifetime, that is, when I was born, half the world was still in extreme poverty. Now, only 1 in 11 people worldwide are that poor, 9%. Global life expectancy has doubled in the past century to 73.5 years. This is a dramatic transformation of the human condition. And by the way, most people not only don't know about this radical drop in global poverty, but assume poverty has continued to rise. But we are now a majority middle income or middle class planet. This has happened just really in the past several years. This may not be your definition of middle income or mine, but according to the World Bank definition of middle income or middle class, now I think 75% of the world qualifies as living in a middle income country. This is material progress, but it's not just about having more clothes, and maybe a smartphone, becoming a Walmart shopper. It's about having the security to think about your life in a longer time horizon. It's about access to literacy and all the expansion of a person's consciousness and world that comes with that. It's about the choices people have and the impact they can make. It's about all those people, billions literally, having so much more to contribute to solving the world's problems than ever before. More people ready and able to help us figure stuff out. There is a pattern here. When you strip out the commentary and the fear and examine as factually as possible what has actually happened, the outcomes themselves, history does seem to demonstrate a direction. And that direction is up. It's a jagged line. And it's not unlike the stock market over time. And certainly, as the investing caveat goes, past performance is no guarantee of future results. But the net direction over time has been relentlessly upward, up to this point. Is it different this time? Sure, it's always different. We are always faced with problems we've never faced before in quite the same way. Do we backslide? All the time. Can really big things go catastrophically wrong? Sadly so. And yet, here we are. Here's an observation Barack Obama has made many times, actually. Quote, by almost every measure, the world is healthier, wealthier, better educated, less violent, more tolerant, and more connected than at any time in human history. If you had to choose a moment in time to be born, and you didn't know ahead of time whether you were going to be rich or poor, what country you were going to be born in, what your race or gender would be, you would choose today. Unquote. So here are some closer to home points of progress in our lives. Some of you are no doubt aware of some of these points, but probably not all of them. Over the past 40 years, traffic fatalities per mile driven in this country have dropped by more than half. Driving is more than twice as safe. Flying has made even more progress. Over the past 30 plus years, total fatalities have dropped by 80%, even though the number of passenger miles flown each year has tripled. So flying is actually 15 times safer than it was more or less a generation ago. We hear a lot more about dementia these days, and in fact, there's more of it because there are more old people. But the frequency of dementia at a given age cohort has been dropping significantly for decades. Different studies show somewhat different rates and use different definitions, but they all point the same way. Fewer and fewer people are getting dementia as they age. Violent crime, and murder in particular, appears to again be reaching all-time lows. That is, lows since reliable records began in the 1960s. It bumped up during the pandemic, but it's dropped again. And so far, 2025 is heading toward the lowest murder rate in recorded U.S. history. The murder rate is now less than half what it was in the early 1990s. And this does not appear to be about locking out criminals. The prison population has dropped by a quarter in the past 6 years. And by the way, in more than 3 decades since Gallup has been asking this question, and violent crime has been falling by more than half, a majority of Americans said that crime was rising in every year but one. They weren't always wrong, but they were mostly wrong. The 1 year, by the way, was 2001, where you see there was a whole different attitude, I think, in that very unifying year of 9/11. Teen pregnancy. Remember babies having babies and the generational impact on poor young women and their children? Teen pregnancy has dropped by well over 3/4 since the early 1990s. And this isn't just about better contraceptives. These are decisions young women are making. The consensus of experts who have talked to them and who have analyzed this is that teenage girls and young women, especially poorer ones, are making better decisions about sex and parenthood because they are seeing better possibilities for their lives. As a University of Virginia sociologist, Brad Wilcox, put it, there is just a greater confidence among young women that they have educational and professional opportunities. So this is a victory against a key link in the cycle of poverty. But it is also moral and spiritual progress. It's about some of this country's most left out young people feeling more hopeful and engaged and valued. Over the past generation or two, The poverty rate in this country has been pretty stubborn, but only if you don't count the safety net, which has been strengthened considerably. If you count all income, as well as all transfer payments to or from the government, that's things like Medicaid, food stamps, SNAP program, SSI, the disability payments, all these things, and earned income tax credit, as well as all the traditional incomes. The poverty rate fell from 20% in the 1980s to 12.9% in 2023. That's a drop of more than a third. Measuring what people actually spend, so-called consumption poverty, which many experts believe is a more accurate way to measure poverty, the share of poor people in the US dropped by well over 2/3 since 1980. The other side of this is, as we all know, that inequality has risen in America since the middle of the 20th century. Some call this a new Gilded Age. We have not reached that extreme. But we've lost a lot of ground since the far more equally distributed economy of the 1950s and 60s. I am not making the assumption that we should all be the same. But when the CEO of a major corporation makes 21 times what his or her average employee makes, and that was the ratio in 1965, that is actually a world where people have a little more in common. Their lives are not quite as far apart as one where CEOs earn 291 times what they pay their employees. That was the most recent number. The good news, at least the better news for most Americans, is that inequality has flattened out quite a bit over the past couple decades. That ratio of CEO to employee pay was actually higher in the year 2000 than today. More importantly, the real median, the median wage for non-supervisory workers has been rising since then, since about 1995, actually. That's the real wage, factoring in inflation. So inequality may be getting better, not worse, but there is still a lot of ground to make up before getting back to the high water mark of the mid-20th century. And then there's climate change. The world definitely keeps getting hotter. Last year was the hottest year on record globally. Each year of the past decade ranks in the 10 warmest years on record. We've seen stronger hurricanes, more floods, and bigger wildfires in recent years. Tragedies like the deadly flood in Texas this month are heartbreaking. And yet, oddly, fortunately, we're seeing far fewer of those tragedies. Climate-related natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, fires, are actually far less deadly than they used to be. Radically so. All such disasters have killed about 13 times fewer people per decade around the world than a century ago. I hope you can follow all those numbers, but 13 times safer from natural disasters, basically. And that is, of course, with 4 times as many people in the world today. So people are a little paradoxically much safer today from climate disasters, despite their frequency and force. Meanwhile, on the subject of climate change, the shift away from carbon-spewing power sources is massively underway. More than 90% of new power sources worldwide last year were clean and renewable. They now produce about 1/3 of the world's power. And that category doesn't include nuclear, the clean and renewable. Most of the developed world, including the US and most of Europe, now see their carbon emissions decline year after year, even as their economies have continued to grow. And China appears to be reaching peak emissions, so-called 2, and joining that club. So increasingly, rising prosperity does not mean rising greenhouse gas emissions. That link is being reversed. So there's a list of things that are headed in the right direction. But are we getting better? Are we making moral or even spiritual progress? A harder thing to measure, to be sure. But here's something that has changed radically. What social scientists sometimes call extensivity. That is, the width of the circle of our compassion and moral community. Here's one way of looking at that. Consider that when this country was founded, the founders declared that all men are created equal. Now, even in the limited way that they applied it, that statement was still a radical expansion of political rights from traditional British aristocracy, where moral standing and worth were inherited, and men were absolutely not created equal. For the founders, all men did not include black men or Native Americans. In practice, it often excluded white men who didn't own real estate. And it was not applied to women at all. But one by one, those categories fell. The founders put the words out there. They knew they had radical moral power. They may or may not have known how much, but the application of those words has filled out, blossomed even, over time. In the lifetime of my own grandmothers, women had no vote. Who could even imagine now that insult to half the population? Today, the only place where women are legally denied the right to vote is the Vatican City. Only cardinals vote, and they're all men. Slavery and indentured servitude were once commonplace in virtually every economy, every civilization, on every inhabited continent on Earth. Now, it's illegal in every country on Earth. That's not to say it doesn't happen in various forms, but it's a criminal act. This is about extending empathy, caring, fairness, and basic respect to ever larger circles, from the family to the village, to the tribe, and then beyond our own social class or economic peer group, over the walls of our racial, ethnic, and cultural groups, our national identities, and beyond all the ways that we think about people like us. As Marion Tooby of the Cato Institute put it, human history is an ever-expanding circle of empathy. So, I am saying that humanity has made progress, really significant progress, in the most fundamental matter of love itself. And that is in the most Christian and universal sense of the word love. We extended in practical ways to include more people than ever before. Collectively, over time, we are pushing out the boundaries we draw in our heads and in our hearts around the reach of our compassion. We've also learned an incredible amount about just working together, whether it's building a space station as part of a 15-nation team, or making sure fresh bananas get from the tropics to a grocery store case in Elm Grove, Wisconsin, just as they ripen year-round. These are marvels of sophisticated teamwork, timing, and terms of engagement. And then there's something as common as, my prop here, this iPhone. Vastly more computing power right here than in the whole Apollo space program. It involves parts, materials, and labor from more than 40 countries. It involves tens of thousands of patents by Apple alone, and hundreds of thousands of patents by others in components, such as the Gorilla Glass and things like that. It's all put together by people and teams in different fields, different regions and continents, and language groups. Everything moved around the globe in this choreography of almost unimaginable complexity. It's an orchestra within an orchestra to a factor of 10 or 100, and I'm over my head in this math, but it's just phenomenal testimony to the degree to which we humans have figured out how to productively collaborate with each other, to harmonize, you could even say. Some things do get worse. I will note that school shootings have risen over the past 5 or 6 years. These incidents are deadly, traumatic, and relatively rare, but not as rare as they were or ought to be. And yet, the normal life of schools has become more peaceful and healthy. A recent statewide study of California schools over a period of 18 years found the number of fights has dropped 56%. The number of weapons on school campuses dropped 70%. Students feel safer, less bullied, more connected at school over this period. There is a greater sense of belongingness. The declines in victimization were even greater among Black and Latino students than among white students. There has been a positive underlying culture shift. So there's plenty to worry about, but also good reason to come at it with a hopeful confidence. By the way, here's a headline from the New York Times. Anxieties over college heighten youth's woes, warning that teen anxiety over college admission is becoming a mental health problem. That doesn't particularly surprise me, probably doesn't surprise any of us. But the date of that headline, 1961. So I could just leave it at that. I mean, there's somehow perspective in that headline from 64 years ago. But I will also note that at that time, 7.7% of Americans were college graduates. Now, the proportion is 37.9%, nearly 5 times higher. So we may have spread that college anxiety out to a lot more young people, but we've definitely expanded college opportunity pretty dramatically. So, what do we owe our progress? If indeed life is looking up, what lifts it? There are many schools of thought. There are the techno-optimists who see us building better and better tools. For them, it's a STEM story. The wheel, the printing press, the steam engine, computers, AI. The libertarians believe it is the expansion of human freedom, as well as the sheer number of human minds at work that lets ingenuity blossom. There's Steven Pinker, the godfather of progress mavens. He sees it as a product of the Enlightenment and the triumph of reason. There is the 19th century German philosopher Hegel's Geist, or spirit, or conscious reason that purposefully prods the world toward a wider and more ethical state of freedom. Then there's the Protestant Christian idea most elegantly expressed by Martin Luther King Jr. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So in Martin Luther King's world, as in Hegel's, history has a built-in direction. There's a metaphysical thumb on the scale. Sooner or later, things will look up. These views of progress can all be true. They're not mutually contradictory. They're not the same, but they don't actually contradict each other. Personally, I'm drawn to Martin Luther King's version. The very fact that people over millennia and across continents, cultures, and language families gravitate ultimately to similar ideas of goodness and better lives suggests to me some kind of gravitational force pulling us not down, but up. Even if we don't agree that life is getting better, we can agree that it would be great if it did. And that in itself has power, it seems to me. Why don't we see it? So if indeed the world is a much better place than ever before, as I'm arguing here, why doesn't it feel that way? Many reasons. First, there remains an incredible amount of suffering in the world. At any given moment, a number of things are getting worse. There's Gaza, Ukraine, depressed teenagers addicted to their phones, and 9% of the world still lives in extreme poverty, even if that represents a level of progress unimaginable not that long ago. That's a lot of hardships still out there. Also, the speed of change alone is a major cause of anxiety. For many people in many parts of the world, social change has just been coming at them too much, too fast. New attitudes towards gender, the computerizing of jobs, immigration, remixing ethnicities and cultures. It's all discombobulating. Also, as life gets better, as horizons expand and possibilities multiply, naturally, expectations rise too. As Zachary Karabell, a historian and social observer, said in a recent conversation, never have so many people felt they have the right to be heard and lead a good life and have their needs respected. In other words, every increment of progress, material, political, social, sets a new level of expectation. You can even say a new level of entitlement. That empty glass, now half full, looks half empty to those who know they deserve a full cup. And who's to say they don't? And then there's this. We perceive the present with a negativity bias, always looking for threats. But we also have a well-documented that airbrushes the difficulties of the past. It may have been a terrifying cliffhanger at the time, but we know how it came out. We know how it ended, and we're still here. But this time, this is different, and so it is. But we seem to be wired with our moral gauges stuck over on the decline indicator. Consider this statement. The social fabric appears to be unraveling. Civility seems like an old-fashioned habit. Honesty like an optional exercise. And trust like the relic of another time. Does that more or less capture the tenor of the times these days? Note that it was written 2,000 years ago in Rome. It's quoted in a recent academic study titled The Illusion of Moral Decline. It gathered all available and relevant data from across 60 countries over at least 70 years, the past 70 years. Researchers found that people in every country and in every decade have believed that moral and ethical behavior started worsening roughly around the time they were born. The study's widely understated conclusion, people are almost certainly mistaken. I'll offer one more reason why we don't perceive the progress around us. There are whole industries built around riling us up and setting our hair on fire. Media empires, social media networks, podcasters, fundraising operations, interest groups. They need our money and our attention to survive. And to do that, they need a threat and an enemy. They are selling us fear narratives. And when we're running a fear narrative, it frames what we see. We're problem-solving beings, but we are also storytellers. And the stories we tell ourselves, our mental narratives, tend to define how we perceive the world around us and make meaning from it. Fear narratives drive us to extremes. They inflame us, and they narrow our vision. When you see through a fear narrative, your world is peopled with enemies. When you no longer trust the systems or structures that bring people together, government, just for one example, you seek safety in drawing battle lines and manning the barricades. I love the observation that the very thoughtful novelist Marilyn Robinson made in an essay a few years ago. She wrote, "My thesis is always the same, and it is very simply stated, though it has two parts. First, contemporary America is full of fear. And second, fear is not a Christian habit of mind. Fear operates as an appetite or an addiction. You can never be safe enough." Then there is the futility narrative. This is the cynical view that everyone in power is corrupt or incompetent, and morals are sliding, and anything that succeeds will just have unintended consequences, because nothing works except perhaps elaborately improbable conspiracy theories. Through the lens of the futility narrative, we see only failures and scandals. Government is a swamp. Corporations are predatory. Authority is abusive. The media is dishonest. All the systems are rigged. It makes us cynical. It empties our spirits, and it constricts the range of our compassion. This is why, on a personal level, I think so many have found the regular expression of gratitude so helpful to a general sense of well-being. It begins to lay tracks for a different narrative, a healing narrative, perhaps, of a world, a life where good things happen. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. Or when you do, you'll explain it away. And then we have many versions in this country of what I might call the fall from grace narrative. Many of us, perhaps most of us, almost unconsciously adopt a framework where there was once a time of greater innocence. It may have not been a Garden of Eden, and you had to do the laundry by hand, but maybe they were simpler, purer, more in balance, with a greater moral clarity. We all carry different ideas of what that innocence looked like. For some, it was the world of our childhoods, or that of our parents or grandparents, when children ran free around the neighborhood until dinner time, pulling wagons and building forts, and it felt safe. Norman Rockwell's America. And families went to church, or they didn't, but they knew they should. And father was allowed to think he knew best. There was a shared understanding of what the good life and the American dream were, or so we imagine. But of course, vast swaths of humanity were excluded from that world, or limited to narrow, ill-fitting roles in it. As a society, we have gained so much since then, so much expansiveness of opportunity and choice, of inclusion and empowerment, and so much else. For others, the age of innocence was the state of nature before the industrial age, before the corrupting spread of urban civilization, before colonization and oppression, when indigenous people lived in a state of balance with the world around them, living simply, harmoniously, sustainably, part of the ecology, not masters or enemies of it. Or so we imagine. All available evidence indicates that in these simpler times, violence was often so unending and brutal that slaughter, rape, and kidnapping were the norm and not the exception. No doubt there have been exceptions to that violent pattern, but it does seem to have been the pattern. So here's an alternative narrative, an alternative storyline, the learning narrative. Human civilization is collective learning. Hegel called it thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which is his famous dialectic process where ideas get beat up, improved, on and on to a better, freer world. The learning narrative explains why the world is increasingly moving away from the mental model where a better life for someone means stealing it from someone else. Because when well-being and prosperity grow from ideas and learning, it's not a zero-sum world. As George Bernard Shaw famously said, if you have an apple and I have an apple, and we exchange apples, then we each have one apple. But if you have an idea and I have an idea, and we exchange ideas, then we now each have two ideas. Ideas are an unlimited resource. And that may be as simple an explanation as any of why we've seen such exponential growth in human prosperity, health, achievement, individual dignity, and freedom. We keep learning by fits and starts, moving right and left, forward and backward, losing the plot and finding one again. It's a jagged line. Sometimes foolish and sometimes tragic, even massively tragic. But we keep learning. We keep figuring things out and making progress. The ultimate value of ideas is not a new notion. Here is the book of Proverbs, written 3,000 years ago, more or less. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold, which turns out to be very literally true. Technology historian Jason Crawford recently wrote, progress was not a windfall. Resources did not find us. We found them. Ideas did not write themselves into our books. We invented them. Progress did not happen to us. We made it. And we can continue to do so. I gave a progress-focused talk like this once, and afterwards a woman asked me, so what are you worried about? My answer then as now was everything, all the above. It's not my intention or my message to minimize or explain away any of these important challenges. Many of them may be very difficult to resolve, and the solutions will, no doubt, in turn produce new problems we will have to figure out. If optimism means complacency, then that takes us no further than when pessimism leads to defeatism or panic. My view is that seeing the world accurately, that is, what has actually happened, how life really was, and how it really is now, is in fact encouraging. It shows that we can and do make progress, that the horrible things that do happen to people, the suffering people have to endure, is far less frequent, less common than it was at any point in the past that we have any evidence of. And the scope of opportunity and choice and agency in the lives of individuals is vastly greater for vast numbers than ever before. What I hope to suggest to you all is that the world we live in gives us a lot of basis for hope and optimism. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that I think hope and optimism are better motivators for action, for solving problems, discovering new things, learning better ways, for building trust, and working together more effectively, for all these forms of forward motion. Hope and optimism are better motivators than fear and catastrophizing. Now, maybe we need both. Maybe we need a kick in the pants to wake us up and take something more seriously. Fair enough. But I would argue that we've got that base pretty well covered. I mean, is there anyone here who can't reel off a list of 3 imminent threats to human prosperity? Climate change, AI, anybody? So we also need a reality-based view of how humanity's track record, and it sounds almost crazy to say, is actually pretty amazingly good. Not only is that perspective usefully, productively encouraging, as well as a happier outlook to live with, but it is also, so far as I can tell, supported by the data. This is our heritage. This is how far we've come. It is also our core task, our mission going forward, to keep learning, growing, enriching our lives both collectively and individually. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet wrote to his people living in Babylonian exile and yearning for home, that God had plans for your welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. But he then encouraged them, in the meantime, not to wait for God to save them, but to build good lives right where they were. The founder of my church, the Christian Science Church, wrote, "Who would stand before a blackboard and pray the principle of mathematics to solve a problem? The rule is already established, and it is our task to work out the solution." That's from Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Analytical Key to the Scriptures. Likewise, Martin Luther King wrote that human progress never rolls on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. I personally view God, the dynamic principle of reality itself, the first cause, if you will, as a force for progress. To quote Mrs. Eddy again, progress is the law of God. But to see it happen, we have to do the work. And we will always have a lot of work to do. But we can do it. And if history is any guide at all, we will do it. World without end, as the Episcopalians say. I'm going to leave you with one last line. Again from Mary Baker Eddy. Are we really grateful for the good already received? Then we shall avail ourselves of the blessings we have, and thus be fitted to receive more. So, thank you all for bearing with me, and I'm happy to take any questions you want to discuss. I want to say, too, that it's now like 4 minutes to 4. I understand people have to leave to go to other things, so either now or at any point during the question, that's understood. Well, this is the Chautauqua culture that I'm just learning. So.